The High Septon speaks for the seven here on Earth. Strike at him, and you are striking at the gods themselves. Kevin Lannister to Cersei Lannister, A Dance with Dragons, Chapter 54. Cersei 1. Before long, King Jaehaerys found himself faced with a new concern. Across the realm in the starry sept of Oldtown, the High Septon collapsed while climbing the steps to his bedchamber. He was dead before he reached the foot of the stairs. Across the realm, the bells of every sept rang out in the morning. The father of the faithful had passed from the world to join the seven. The king had little time for prayer or mourning. No sooner had his high holiness been laid to rest than the most devout would gather within the starry sept to choose a new High Septon, and Jaehaerys understood that the peace of the realm rested upon his successor, continuing the course set by the man who would come before him. The king's preferred choice for the crystal crown was Septon Bath, who had first come to King's Landing to oversee the libraries of the Red Keep, only to become one of his grace's most valued counsellors. Yet it took only a night for Bath himself to convince the king that such a course was unwise. He was too young, too obscure, too unconventional in his beliefs, and was not even counted amongst the most devout. There was no chance that he would be chosen, for another candidate would need to be found, one more likely to win the support of his brothers within the faith. On one matter, however, the king and his counsellors were of single mind. Every effort must be made to ensure that Septon Mattheus did not ascend to the Crystal Crown. His years in King's Landing had left behind a legacy of suspicion and ill feeling, and Jaehaerys could neither forgive nor forget the words the Septon had spoken before the gates of Dragonstone. Rhaego Draz, the Master of Coin, proposed that a few carefully placed bribes might achieve the desired outcome. Spend enough gold amongst these most devout, and they will choose me, he japed, though I would not want the job. Daemon Velaryon and Kyle Corbray instead urged a display of strength, though Lord Daemon favoured sending his fleet, whilst Lord Kyle offered to march at the head of an army. Albert Massey, the bent-backed Master of Laws, wondered aloud whether Septon Mattheus might meet the same end as the High Septon, who had caused so many difficulties for Maegor and Aenys, a sudden unexpected death. Septon Bath, Grand Maester Vermithor and Queen Alysanne were appalled by such suggestions, and the king dismissed them immediately. Instead, Jaehaerys resolved that he and his queen would travel to Oldtown without delay. His High Holiness had been both a faithful servant to the gods and a steadfast friend of the Iron Throne, and it was only fitting that they should attend his funeral rite in person. Only by dragon could they hope to make Oldtown in time. The prospect of the king and the queen travelling alone to Oldtown troubled every member of the small council, even the Septon Bath. There are still those amongst my brothers who do not love you, your grace, Bath pointed out. Lord Daemon shared the concerns and reminded Jaehaerys what happened to the Queen of Maidenpool. When the king replied that he had the protection of House Hightower, several uneasy glances were exchanged. Lord Donald is a schemer and a sulker, declared Manfred Redwine. I do not trust him. Nor should you. He does what he thinks best for himself, his house and Oldtown, and cares not a fig for anyone or anything else, not even for his king. Then I must convince him that what is best for his king is what is best for himself, his house and Oldtown, said Jaehaerys. I believe I can do that. With that, the king brought the discussion to a close and commanded that their dragons be made ready. Even for dragons, the journey from King's Landing to Oldtown was a long one. Along the way, the king and queen paused twice, once at Bitterbridge and again at Highgarden, spending the night at each castle whilst taking counsel with its lord. The members of the small council had insisted they travel with at least some protection. To that end, Sir Joffrey Doggett flew with Alysanne, while the Scarlet Shadow Jonquil Drake accompanied Jaehaerys, so that the burden borne by each dragon would remain balanced. The arrival of Vermithor and Silverwing above Oldtown took the city entirely by surprise, drawing thousands into the streets to watch and wonder. No message had preceded them, and many amongst the populace were fearful, uncertain what their coming meant. Perhaps none were more so unsettled than Septon Mattheus, who reportedly turned pale upon hearing the news. Jaehaerys landed Vermithor upon the broad marble plaza before the starry sept, yet it was the queen who drew the greater gasp from the city when Silverwing descended atop the high tower itself. the beating of her wings stirring the flames of its famed beacon. Though the funeral rites of the High Septon were said to be the purpose of their journey, His High Holiness had already been laid to rest within the crypts beneath the Starry Sept, before the King and Queen reached Oldtown. Even so, Jaehaerys delivered a eulogy, speaking before a vast gathering of Septons, maesters and small folk assembled in the plaza. When he concluded, the King declared that he and the Queen would remain in the city until the new High Septon had been chosen, so we might ask for his blessing. As Archmaester Goodwin later recorded, the small folk cheered, the maesters nodded eagerly, and the Septons looked at one another and thought on dragons. Orton told me that the High Septon has no name. Can that be true? In Myr we all have names. Oh, he had a name once. They all do. Even Septons born of noble blood go only by their given name once they've taken their vows. When one of them is elevated to High Septon, he puts aside that name as well. The faith will tell you he no longer has any need of a man's name. He has become the avatar of the gods. How do you distinguish one High Septon from another? With difficulty, one has to say the fat one, or the one before the fat one, or the old one who died in his sleep. You can always wrinkle out their birth names if you like, but they just umbrage you if you use them. It reminds them they were once born ordinary men, and they do not like that. Tiana Merryweather and Cersei Lannister, A Feast for Crows chapter 28, Cersei 6. Throughout their stay in Oldtown, Jaehaerys and Alysanne would lodge in Lord Donald Hightower's own chambers at the summit of the High Tower, with the whole of the city spread out beneath them. No record survives of the conversations that passed between the royal couple and their host, for they were spoken behind closed doors, without even a maester present to bear witness. Years later, however, King Jaehaerys recounted the events to Septon Bath, who preserved a summary of those discussions for historical record. The High Towers of Oldtown were an ancient, illustrious house, wealthy, powerful, proud, and numerous. For generations it had been customary for younger sons, brothers, and cousins, and bastards of the family to enter into the service of the faith, and over the centuries many had risen to positions of considerable influence. In 54 AC, Lord Donald Hightower counted a younger brother, 2 nephews, and 6 cousins amongst the servants of the Seven. His brother, one of those nephews, and 2 of his cousins were numbered amongst the most devout, clad in their cloths of silver. Lord Donald's ambition was that one of these men would be elevated to the Crystal Crown. King Jaehaerys cared little whether the next High Septon sprang from a great house or from the lowest of backgrounds. His sole concern was the man chosen being exemptionalist. Never again could the Starry Sept be allowed to challenge the Targaryen custom of marriage between brother and sister. The king wished for the new father of the faithful to formally embrace exemptionalism as doctrine within the faith itself. Though his grace had no objection to Lord Donald's brother, nor any of the other Hightowers who might be considered. None had yet declared their views upon the matter, and so, after many hours of discussion, an accord was reached and sealed with a lavish feast, during which Lord Donald extolled the wisdom of the king, whilst introducing him to a host of brothers, uncles, and nephews, nieces and cousins. Elsewhere in the city, the most devout gathered within the Starry Sept to select their new shepherd. Unbeknownst to many, both the king and Lord Hightower had their own agents amongst them. 4 rounds of voting proved necessary. As expected, Septon Mattheus led on the first ballot, yet failed to secure enough votes to claim the Crystal Crown. Thereafter, his backing diminished with each successive vote, whilst other candidates grew in strength. On the 4th ballot, the most devout departed from tradition and chose a man who was not of their own number. The Crystal Crown passed to Septon Alfyn, who had journeyed across the Reach a dozen times in his litter on behalf of King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne. No man in the 7 kingdoms was more adherent, a defender of exemptionalism, than Alfyn. Yet, he was also the eldest of the 7 speakers, and lacked the use of his legs beside, making it likely the stranger would come for him sooner rather than later. When that day arrived, the king assured Lord Donald his successor would be a Hightower, provided Lord Donald's kin proved themselves steadfast supporters of the exemptionalist cause throughout Septon Alfyn's tenure. Thus was an agreement made, if Septon's Bath accounts is to be believed. Bath himself appeared to never have doubted the truth of it, though he lamented the ease with which the most devout could be swayed and brought. It would be better if the seven themselves would choose their voice on earth. But when the gods are silent, lords and kings will make themselves heard, he wrote. Even so, he maintained that both Alfyn and Lord Donald's brother, who followed him upon the Crystal Crown, were far worthier of the honour than Septon Mattheus could ever have been. No man was more surprised by the election than Septon Alfyn himself, who was at Ashford when the news of his selection reached him. He travelled by litter. More than a fortnight passed before he arrived in Oldtown. Whilst awaiting his coming, Jaehaerys spent days visiting Balladon, Three Towers, Uplands and Honeyhold. He even flew Vermithor to the Arbour, where he sampled some of the island's finest vintages. Queen Alysanne remained behind in Oldtown. The Silent Sisters welcomed her to their mother house for a day of prayer and contemplation, whilst another was spent amongst the Septors, who tended the city's poor and infirm. Amongst the novices she encountered was her niece, Jaehaerys Targaryen, daughter of Rhaena, whom her grace later described as a learned and devout young woman, though very much given to stammers and blushes. For 3 days the Queen immersed herself in the vast libraries of the Citadel, emerging only to attend lectures concerning the Valyrian dragon wars, the art of leechcraft, and the gods worshipped in the Summer Isles. Thereafter she hosted a feast for the assembled archmaesters in their own dining hall, and even took it upon herself to lecture them. If I had not become queen, I might have liked to become a maester, she told the conclave. I read, I write, I think. I am not afraid of ravens or of bitter blood. There are other highborn girls who feel the same. Why not admit them to your citadel? If they cannot keep up, send them home, the way you send home boys who are not clever enough. If you give girls a chance, you might be surprised how many would forge a chain. The archmaesters, reluctant to contradict their queen, smiled politely, nodded their heads, and assured her grace the proposal would be given due consideration. Once the new High Septon had arrived in Oldtown, kept his vigil within the starry sept, and had been properly anointed and consecrated in the service of the Seven, he surrendered both his earthly name and earthly ties. He bestowed his blessings upon King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne during a solemn public ceremony. By then, the Kingsguard and a company of retainers had joined the royal party, and his grace resolved to make his return by way of the Dawnish Marches and the Stormlands, visiting Horn Hill, Nightsong, Black Raven, followed thereafter.